YouTube says I'm live. Hi, you just saw Candy. Come on up. Candy the Wonder Pup. There you go. Good girl. Hopefully she'll be relatively calm. If someone goes walking their dog in front of the house, she'll bark like a banshee. She's going there now. Maybe she'll get it out of the way early. It's Gordon Causey, Gordy Canuck on Twitter, Grow a Set on Reddit. I see I have 2 people watching my last video. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the interaction. I enjoyed the back and forth. I'm a social guy, and this isn't really very social in my books. Social is face-to-face, actual human interaction. This is virtual, but it's still good. It can still be good. It's interesting. Before I get going, for the community standards people with Google or YouTube or whoever, nothing in this video is meant to be construed or taken as medical advice. Verify, fact check everything. This is just one man's opinions being expressed. Likewise, with anything in the comment field, these are just individual opinions. And again, not in any way, shape, or form to be construed as expert, authoritative. Fact check everything, and that apply in today's world with so many agendas playing out. It's always wise to seek out alternative viewpoints, which I don't think most people do. I think most of the population looks for shortcuts. But the World Economic Forum just concluded their meetings in Davos, Switzerland. They ended a couple days ago. It ended on the 20th. And which was kind of the theme of my last one, which my last video I did when the meetings were still going on. Now that they're over, what can we expect going forward? One thing I wanted to touch on first was Klaus Schwab had been in the news, and he was talking about the importance of having face-to-face meetings, how vitally important it is for the world leaders to, corporates and government leaders to get together so that they're all singing from the same songbook. They are unifying, while the rest of us, the great unwashed, we are probably more divided than at any time in world history, even within individual, it's not just nations divided against nations. It's nations are divided. The population is divided within itself. There are so many different things that are put out there that basically divide the population: urban against rural, right against left, religious, non-religious, gay, straight, and everything else. And, it just, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And one of the things that came out, though, moving on, is this head of the World Health Organization, which is partnered with the WEF. Surprise, surprise. They're the head of the WHO, which is a gentleman by the name of Dr. Tedros. And this is one of those things I'm not 100% sure of, but I do not believe that Dr. Tedros, his PhD notwithstanding, I don't believe he's a medical doctor. I don't think he has a medical degree. I could be wrong on that. But I actually think his PhD is in another discipline. It may be health related, but it's not medical. And he was in their videos of him out now addressing the World Economic Forum and talking about the next disease, which he referred to as disease X. And how when the next disease comes out, how they will be able to produce approved vaccines even faster than what just happened with COVID. which is scary in our dumbed down world, where a large chunk of the population was made to believe that a process that takes 10 plus years, that it could be redacted into just a few short months. And people believed it. And now will they show, if they're going to come out even faster when disease X comes out, or it'll be a few weeks, like, 8, 10, 12 weeks, and we're all ready to go. And we believe that a 10-year process, and it's actually more than 10 years, that could be reduced into just a few short months. Well, is it that big of a leap to think that people will buy in and believe that it can be reduced even further? And one of the things I'm expecting is I more or less view, what happened during COVID as perhaps some have suggested that this was that it was something of a test run. Well, if that was the test run, and I think they're learning as they go, seeing how far they can push things, we're going to find out that that Vax Pass system, they laid the infrastructure in place in a country like Canada, where you couldn't even sit down to have a simple cup of coffee without disclosing your vaccination status. I genuinely believe it's going to come back, and before the end of this year. I think it could be this bivalent shot. I think a more likely candidate is next fall, when flu season comes around, and they're talking about having a combo shot for COVID and the flu. And they got so many people to buy in to the idea that this was being done for health, not for draconian control, but for health. The old expression is fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I think a large segment of the population will be fooled again. And the other big thing that's coming out of the World Economic Forum and other in the mainstream media is an idea that I think should scare people, but I don't think most are paying attention. And this is the concept of what they're calling 15-minute cities. And I believe they're, at least officially, their plan is to do a test run of it in some places in England. I think Oxford is one of them. And basically the idea is, so you talk about control, everyone will have within a 15-minute walk or bike ride of their residence that access to schools, education, work, shopping, basically all your needs will be within a 15-minute radius of where you reside. And that your need to travel beyond that 15-minute radius will be restricted. That it will be, there's talk of you'll be allowed 100 visits outside, at least that's the concept I hear being punted right now. You'll be 100 times you'll be allowed, which means more than once every 4 days you could travel outside of your restricted zone. Talk about divide and conquer. Now they'd have the world divided into little 15-minute blocks. And dystopian, Orwellian, put whatever label on it you like. And it's not going to be good. I have April saying, may have debilitated them. They won't be so quick to line up this time. I pray you're right. I think there are more people who are awake now. I remember it was very early, June, July of 2020, when this idea of a vaccine passport was first presented by so-called conspiracy theorists. There were individuals saying, just wait, they're going to come out with a vaccine passport, and you're not going to be able to travel or engage in social activities or anything unless you have this vaccine passport. And those who saw this coming, and admittedly, I was not one of them, but as soon as people brought out that idea and I read about it, I didn't discount it. I figured, yeah, that makes sense. I can see that. I started posting on it myself. I started to echo what was being said. Will not couching it in terms of I will not be surprised in the least. And as we saw it happen in my area of Ontario, Canada, they brought in the vaccine passport on September 22nd, 2021. I have to be careful because I tend to get my dates wrong on these videos. I mean to say 2021 and I say 2020, or I mean to say 2022 when I say 2020. So I apologize for that. Probably someone will say it's because I had COVID and I have long COVID and it's affecting my cognitive abilities. I think I'm just getting old or just tired, but regardless. The world we're heading into is freaky. It's scary. This whole idea of these 15-minute cities, they've gotten us to accept so many contradictory rules. In my workplace, I've mentioned many times, I was As soon as a dog goes walking down the street, she's got to stand at the window and bark like a banshee. Calm down. Oh, the joys of dog ownership. And now I forgot almost entirely what I was saying. Oh, shut up. I love you, but you're annoying. Lay down. There we go. She's somewhat obedient. I told her to lie down and she lay down. So what was I talking about? The joys of dog ownership. Completely lose your train of thought. I think the solution to the 15-minute city is to get out of the city. I plan to move from the lower mainland to interior BC before the 15-minute city arrives. I think that's a decent solution. I know a lot of people who are moving out of larger urban centers and are moving. I worked with a guy who just moved from my area of southeastern Ontario, which is already a small area to begin with, rural, agricultural, a lot of farmland, and he's moved out to New Brunswick because but I look at New Brunswick, and New Brunswick during the height of the Vax Pass nonsense, the province of New Brunswick, at least for a time, restricted the ability of the unvaxxed to go into grocery stores. And New Brunswick has an older population. They're one of the older populations in Canada. And so I think that impacts decision-making around things. But I was going to talk about the fact that in my workplace, there was I'm ex-military until June of 2021. And then I started working again in May of 2022. So coming up on a year in a large retail environment. And the plexiglass just came down from in front of all the cashiers. Finally, I think it came down Monday, or just within the last few days, it came down. And it was a weird feeling seeing finally a small little return to normalcy. No more having to, stick your head around the plexiglass to be heard properly, or likewise when, handing change, not having to put money through the little slot. I mean, there's so many areas in which, and this is part of the problem, this is the difficulty in terms of, this divide and conquer. Some people are talking about, the move that we're on toward a cashless society. And that is absolutely something that should concern everyone, because they can monitor when you're paying by iPhone or with your cell phone or with a card. Every transaction can be tracked. You leave a digital record of every transaction. It's all tied back to you. Think of the joys of cash. How many grandparents have slipped a $5 or a $10 or a $20 bill to their grandchild? Imagine not being able to do that anymore. But the difficulty is that paying with a card or whatever, it's so convenient. And we trade our sovereignty for convenience all the time. We trade our sovereignty for saving 50 cents on a loaf of bread. Download this app and you'll get a preferred price on this product. And so people will, download the app, answer, 586 questions, and all to save. I'm not suggesting the savings are insignificant. It's 50 cents here, it's $1 there. It adds up over time, but we're trading. We're trading our sovereignty as individuals, and we're handing over our information. We're becoming little more than digital little footprints. And it's something of a thesis statement that I have. The ultimate end game of the Great Reset of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, what I call the Fourth Reich, is to have what is left of humanity as little more than digital property of our corporate masters and government officials who basically are at their beck and call. And that's what this World Economic Forum is in a nutshell. It's bringing together the world's most powerful and wealthy entities and individuals in tandem with government. And they're getting their marching orders. And so that they're all singing from the same songbook. And we saw that during the COVID era in 2020, March of 2020, when the world went into lockdown, and just about the entire Western world went into lockdown, where this idea that micromanaging human behavior could somehow mitigate the spread of a virus. Right from the beginning, my disconnect from lockdown and everything was over the fact that there is no way. Germs, bacteria, viruses, pathogens are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. And this idea that you could micromanage human behavior to stop them from being passed around was just insane. When Ontario brought in the lockdown measures, they enumerated about 270 odd business groups that were exempted, that were allowed to stay open, that were so-called essential businesses. And the contradictions within those rules were mind-blowing. But in order to be able to recognize the mind-blowing contradictions, you had to be thinking critically. And fear robs people's ability. It takes away people's ability to think critically. Someone who's drowning in quicksand in critically thinking, that struggling against the quicksand will only make things worse. But because of the all-encompassing fear that people undergo, they start struggling, making things worse. People were so terrified of the deadly coronavirus that they kept talking about every day on the nightly news, and how, the deadly coronavirus just claimed another 38 victims in the province of Ontario as it tears like a tsunami through the population in long-term care facilities. With heavy music in the background, it just drove fear into the population. And their FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, during World War II, told the population of the United States, he told their people, he said, the only thing to fear is fear itself. Whereas during this COVID era, fear was ingrained into people as if you're afraid, that's good. That's the rational response. And so what's going to happen going forward? Are we going to see a disease X? They told us before COVID came that there would be a pandemic, that there would be a virus spreading widely. It was famous predictions by Dr. Anthony Fauci before the inauguration of Donald Trump. He said, during this administration, there will be a deadly outbreak of a pathogen, of a virus. And now the same parties that were predicting COVID are now predicting that we're going to have a disease X emerging sometime in the future. And I don't think it will be very long, but I think it could be a year. Before, I think it will be before the end of this year, before 2023 rolls into 2024. I've got Dirk Zink, nice name, saying hi. Hi back, Dirk. And so we have the 15-minute city, and everything's going to be driven. And I think this is one area where they're trying to get the messaging, nail it down to drive fear into us. And I think they've been largely unsuccessful for the past 10, 15, 20 years. There's been this effort to drive fear over climate change. And it just hasn't resonated with people. They've got their poster child, Greta Thunberg from Sweden. Thanks, Dirk. Dirk says he's been listening and agrees with everything you said so far. Hopefully not everything. I'm not Nostradamus. I don't like to think I'm not Nostradamus, but I don't think I get everything right. If anything, I find I have what I'll call an impatient bias. I want things to move faster in a fashion. I prefer an open fight to what we've been going through. Everything seems to be going in slow motion and very incremental, and I think that's by design. I think that is by design. They want, it's incremental creep, slow, and people we've got one group of people who are fixated on the move away from cash and the move towards digital currencies, and that's their focus. Others don't like these masks that cover half the face. And I love that study that came out. There was a study that came out recently, peer-reviewed science, and it was interesting because it was punted two ways. They found that basically between N95 and those loose-fitting medical masks, I have one, keep it around as an example. So one of these loose-fitting things with the huge gaps all over, you got that huge gap around the nose, the huge gaps at the side. They came out with a study and they said that these are no different from an N95. Then they provide the same level of protection. So there are two ways that it was punted. Those like me or against masks said, okay, well, N95s are just as useless as this crap. But those who love masks say these are just as effective as those wonderful N95s. I mean, and just to be fun, just to have a bit of fun, just to try and open up some eyes, I invite people to go to the World Health Organization's own website and to read the handling and wearing procedures for masking, because this is stuff we learned in grade 7 and 8 health class about cross-contamination, how we wipe our noses and then we touch a door handle and then that spreads and spreads and spreads. Well, you're wearing a germ magnet on your face. It's damp, it's warm. It's a great place for germs, bacteria, viruses, pathogens to collect on. Then you touch it, this petri dish, you touch the damn thing, and then you touch all kinds of common surfaces. Well, you're just a super spreader of pathogens. You're just a viral super spreader. And if you go into the World Health Organization, they advise that before putting on this stupid, useless thing, that you wash your hands. That's their it's not advice. It's saying this is the proper way to wear and handle the mask. They say first you wash your hands or sanitize. Then you put the mask on. ensuring there are, that it should be tight, and they advise it has to be tightly sealed to the face, which you can't get a tight seal with this piece of garbage. And then if at any time you touch the mask, that you are immediately to, again, wash your hands and sanitize afterwards. And then when you remove it, it's to be thrown away. And again, immediately, because you've just touched a petri dish, you're to wash or sanitize your hands again. What do masks do? They encourage people touch their faces all the time. They touch the mask all the time. Then they're touching items in the store, picking them up, looking at them, put them back. They're touching the keypads, the door handles, the gas pumps, so many common touch surfaces. So it's so contradictory. I mean, I'm somewhat contradictory because I don't care about germs, viruses, and pathogens being around, because God gave me an immune system to fight them. And Dirk is saying they want the frog to warm up before they boil him. It's the old analogy of, you put a frog into a boiling pot, well, it's not boiling to start, but you just turn up the temperature incrementally, little bit by little bit, and the frog, before you know it, he's boiling and he's not even aware of it, and he's dead. And that's the world we're living in. But climate change is the biggest non-expert view, because I haven't done computer modeled simulations the way, I even forget, the International Council on Climate Change, or whatever the heck they call that thing, the IPCC or whatever it's called, International Panel on Climate Change. They run computer modeled simulations and that try to project outward into the future what's going to happen with the climate. Well, how do you decide what inputs to put in? Okay, they put in carbon, obviously, because that's the big bad boogeyman, but there's ocean currents, there's solar flares and cosmic rays and volcanic eruptions, and goodness knows there are probably how many different variables are there to put into those models. There's more than they can put in. So they focus in on whichever ones they choose and get the results they desire. And if you're not going to get any money from the International Panel on Climate Change, you're not going to, they dole out billions of dollars every year for research proving that man-made climate change is a significant issue. If your model, if your projections don't lead to those conclusions, you're not going to get any money. And the example I always like to throw out is that around the year 1100, the planet went through a period of climate change. What a shock, the climate changes. And what happened was the ice sheets in Greenland pulled back to such an extent that the Vikings actually named it Greenland. That's where we got the name from, because the land was green. The ice sheets had pulled back, and the Vikings actually established settlements. And those settlements remained for somewhere between 200 and 300 years. And then the climate changed again. They referred that period of time, and I don't have my dates exactly. I haven't just read it. So, but it's sometime around 1000 to 1300. Within those parameters, that period is referred to as the medieval warming period. And the medieval warming period was followed by a period or time referred to as the Little Ice Age. And the Little Ice Age is said to have lasted sometime 1400, right into the 17 and maybe even early 1800s, resulting in climatic events that were horrendous and had never been witnessed before in human history. But this climate change narrative is simply, it's like COVID. But the difference, the reason COVID worked so well is COVID was able to be presented as a threat that was, a freight train coming at us at 100 miles an hour. And there was an immediacy to it. people became convinced that if they caught this COVID bug, that they were going to be on a ventilator in an ICU unit, and that they would likely die. And they sold that and did an incredibly good job on the majority of the population. Most people believed it. I've mentioned before that I went to high school with a girl. I won't say her name. Chances of her seeing this video are probably next to zero, but regardless. Deb. Throw out a name. So I'd gone to high school with this girl named Deb. And I was voicing my opposition to lockdown right at the beginning in March of 2020. And I had high school classmates say, Deb, giving her full name, saying, Deb has COVID and she's fighting for her life. You have to take this seriously. You have to follow the direction. And I took a step back, said, oh, okay, so someone I actually know has COVID. And they said, she's fighting for her life. That was the exact terms. It was put down. Girl I went to high school with, Lisa, said, you got to take this seriously, Gordon. Deb has this and she's fighting for her life. Well, as things turned out, I was also friends with Deb on Facebook, and we played games of Scrabble together online. So I had a conversation with her a week or 2 weeks, 3 weeks within the month of this news that she had COVID and was fighting for her life. And I asked her, I said, I heard you had COVID. Was it bad? She said, oh, yeah, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I said, how long were you in hospital? And she said she never went to hospital. She was never in hospital. She described it as an incredibly bad flu-like illness, and that she had isolated herself in a motel room north of Toronto because she didn't want to take the bug home. And that gets blown up by mutual friends, and they're saying she's fighting for her life. Everyone I know who's gotten COVID recovered. I had COVID myself, although I can't say definitively it was COVID because I'm one of that very small minority of people who's never actually been tested for the virus, ever. They offered me, store would offer you free testing kits. I was like, pass. But in February of 2022, so it'll be just about a year coming up, it went through, a bug went through the house. Started with my youngest spiking a fever that by the next day he was right as rain. The following evening on a Friday, I spiked a fever. I don't know how high. I didn't take my temperature, but I had chills, where you can't get warm, and muscle joint ache and pain, dry, non-productive cough, low-grade headache. And by Saturday, I was feeling better. By Sunday, I was just feeling a little run down. And by Monday, I was 100%. And I've had people tell me, well, then it couldn't have been COVID because it was so mild. COVID is this, deadly coronavirus. Point of fact is that, at least according to a study done that was published to Nature magazine, which is a highly regarded not medical, but scientific publication. They looked at Iceland, and scientists in Iceland had scienced the crap out of COVID. And because it's a small nation of around 300,000 people, every infection, they actually genetically sequenced it so they could check chains of transmission. And their research found that 80% of the population who tested positive for COVID, that it was either completely asymptomatic or the symptoms were very mild, with the most common symptoms being low-grade headache, dry, non-productive cough, and sore joints and muscles. And that was 80% of infections. But just to get back to climate change, I expect to see fear ramped up over climate change to try and make it appear more of an immediate threat, and to use it as a selling point for these 15-minute cities to reduce our carbon footprints, to save the planet. But ultimately, the end game that is envisioned is to have us all as little more than those of us who are left. Because I tend to think that 2030 is kind of year one of the Great Reset of the Fourth Reich. That everything between now and 2030 is more or less preamble, that they're setting it up. And so we're talking about 7 years from now. I'm 56 now, I'll be 63. And younger people who don't have the same historical touch points that those of my generation and older have, they're the ones who are going along, by and large. I'm not a big one to go to rallies and protests. I've gone to some. I went to one in Peterborough, and I'm thinking it was in March or April of 2021 when I went to one up in Peterborough. And I took note of the demographics of the people in attendance, and I tended to be on the lower end, 56. I noticed that there were a lot of older people there, a lot of people who know their history either from having read about it or learned about it, or those who had it passed down to them. People who had parents and grandparents who fought in World War II or maybe even World War I, who have lived through the lies that, Amina, good to have you back on. Lived through all the lies that we've gone through. The Vietnam era, in the United States, the Vietnam War, that conflict stretched all the way back into the 50s, but the Americans started to get involved sometime in the mid to late 60s, and then it was sometime around 68 where they more or less went all in, and nearly 60,000 American servicemen lost their lives. And at that time, the lie that was used to promote that war and to sell the urgency and the need to have so many young American men go over and give up their lives was that the dominoes were going to start falling. If South Vietnam fell to the communist North, then that would be the first domino, and dominoes would start following in Malaysia and Singapore and the Koreas and South Korea. It would just, and the next thing you know, it would be on America's doorstep. And we had to, we got to stop it here. We have to stop it in Vietnam before it takes over all Southeast Asia and then spreads globally. I'm reading what Dirk is writing. We had great turnouts to freedom rallies. However, they didn't seem to help anything. The one that I do think had an impact was the one that was in Ottawa, the big one. Tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of Canadians lining the highways and overpasses, waving flags, people from every walk of life. That was incredible. If you remember back to that time, Ontario, where I live, we were back into lockdowns and everything else and masking mandates. And it shone a bright light to anyone who was willing to look on the absolute insanity and hypocrisy of it all, because you had women, children, men dancing around, hugging, laughing. There was a video of them playing We Are the World with a bunch of women and children going around in circles and just joy. And Dirk's out in British Columbia, where it's only, I guess, 3 hours earlier there. So 9 coming up on 9:30. In Ontario, where I am, it's coming up on 12:30. That event. And you saw the way they framed it, the news framed it, the propaganda that came out of the sea. It was framed as an illegal occupation, public ground. People on public ground were now illegal occupiers. And, and they interview Ottawa residents who were terrified to walk downtown with these horrible anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers, and the propaganda was over the top. The only thing I could empathize with somewhat is I'm not a big fan of those air horns, and I know they became something of a rallying cry. People honk honk became something of a way to, if you're posting on it, you'd write honk honk at the end of it, and that's the only area. And I know that biggest thing, I want to give some hope. And what gives hope at the end of, I'm a night owl too, Dirk. Dirk's saying, you are up late, I'm a night owl. Yes, the honking was too much. I'm a night owl too, always have been. When I was, my last posting with the military, I worked rotating shifts, 12 hours between days and nights, from either 2000 to 0800 to use military time. So from 8 p.m. till 8 a.m. or from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. And changing back and forth messes you up, but I've always been a bit of a night owl. But the hope that, the only hope that I genuinely believe there is in faith. But we live in a faithless world. That was interesting. I was listening to the sermon today, my pastor at the church I attend, and he was talking about how a lot of people will claim to be non-religious, but most of us are religious. Even professing atheists are religious in worship of all manner of things. And he referenced the Toronto Maple Leafs, a team that hasn't won the Stanley Cup, he said, since 1968. He said 1968 or 69. Immediately in the congregation, he was corrected and was told, no, it's 1967. Yeah, because, and people, they wear, look at me. I'm wearing this because it was given to me, so I didn't pay for it. I don't buy anything like this normally, but here I am with an Arizona Cardinals hoodie, so we worship our sports teams, are devoted to them, watch every game, know all of the stats, or entertainment, how people will binge watch a Netflix series. And it impacts our purchasing behaviors, the way people will buy branded merchandise like this, or subscribe to a streaming service so they can watch all of Game of Thrones or Queen's Gambit or whatever. And worship, we're religious beings at our core. But do we worship things that are worthwhile or that are transient? Do we worship that which is eternal, or do we worship those things which are transient, which are here today and gone tomorrow? And I've been wanting to do another video about talking about the Bible, but it's a challenge for me. I've never been to a Bible college. I'm not a theologian by any stretch of the imagination. I've read the Bible cover to cover, and I do my best and don't always succeed. Dirk is saying this is a spiritual battle between good and evil. And when we talk about the Great Reset, the false industrial revolution, as Klaus Schwab likes to call it, I know some will say, well, why is God allowing this to happen? Why isn't God stopping it? And I'm going to tell you, this is what I believe. God isn't allowing this to happen. God isn't like figuring out his next move. when the Jewish people, ancient Israel, kingdoms of Israel and Judah, when they turned away from God and began worshiping other things, began worshiping other idols, then God used the Assyrians to conquer the northern kingdom of Israel. He used the Babylonians to conquer the southern kingdom of Judah. And if you look at our world, where we worship all manner of things, and where you can't even say the Lord's Prayer in school anymore. The idea of having a prayer at the beginning of a legislative assembly is regarded as you can't do it. And so we're worshiping our idols, we're worshiping consumerism, we're worshiping sports teams, we're worshiping the entertainment industry. Well, there's a tear down going on, and God is behind it. Now, Dirk is writing, I studied the Bible like crazy, pray for armor of God. He gave me Psalms 2 yesterday after I prayed. I prayed tonight, your channel came up out of the blue. Let's read the second Psalm. I don't know the second one. I know the first. That's the one about having faith like planted by a river. There's a song I like. Just like a tree that's planted by the water, we shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. It's where that something of a protest song, and that's where it came from. If you're ever looking to find Psalms in the Bible, my Bible, this one includes the Apocrypha. But if you ever want to find the Bible, just go to if you go dead center in most Bibles, you'll end up in Proverbs, and then just go left. So second Psalm, and we'll end it off with this. Second Psalm. Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds asunder and cast their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord has them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell of the decree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron, and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now, therefore, O kings, be wise, be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, with trembling. Kiss his feet, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. The word of the Lord. And in church we say, thanks be to God. It sounds like what's happening right now, or what just took place in Davos, Switzerland. The kings of the earth have just finished their gathering in Davos, Switzerland, and they have conspired and they have their plans. God already knows what their plans are. And they will lose in the end. I see I have 7 people watching. That has to be something of a record for me anyway. At the same time, if you can, get into this book. And I know that church attendance is not popular now, but if you can find a faithful church that is biblically based, is not woke in the ways of this world, that does not try to reconcile the Bible to the way of this world. And the best, most obvious example of that is this whole LGBTQTZYX stuff. God created man and woman, male and female. He created them. A person's subjective feelings about, well, today I feel like, doesn't erase objective reality. And Dirk is saying that God is laughing at the WEF. WEF said they want to be God. Yuval Noah Harari. I would invite you to that's his name. Yuval, Yuval, Noah, like Noah in the Bible. Harari is Klaus Schwab's #1 top advisor, kind of his right-hand man. And you can find videos of him where he openly mocks God, the invisible man in the sky, and how this notion that we have inalienable God-given rights and a soul, that's over. He says, that's over. Now we are replacing random mutations with intelligent design. We're building a tower. They are trying to build a Tower of Babel, or Babel, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And the end will be the same. I've rambled on long enough, 51 minutes, and this was very disjointed. I apologize, but if you did like it, thank you. I got 5 likes already. Hard to believe. If you want to subscribe, probably do another one again in another few nights. Hopefully when my thoughts are a little more focused. Tonight was more or less just rambling. We're going to have challenging times ahead, but we'll get through. God is on the throne. So God bless everyone, and I'll see you tonight. And thanks for subscribing, Dirk. Talk to you later. Good night, all.